Good day once again from the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. At this hour, the Orbit 2 team of flight controllers is on console, having taken a shift handover from their Orbit 1 counterparts within the past hour, getting ready for the latch-up, the berthing and installation of the Orbital ATK Cygnus cargo craft that arrived at the International Space Station just over 2 hours ago. We'll talk more about that in a minute. On console at this hour, presiding over the Orbit 2 team of flight controllers on the right side of your picture is Flight Director Scott Stover. He is joined on console for this 8-hour shift by spacecraft communicator Jay Marschke, who will be talking directly to the crew on board the International Space Station as they work through the rest of their activities for the remainder of this day. As we said, the Orbital ATK Cygnus cargo craft arrived at the International Space Station and is now in an orientation, being controlled by the robotics officer here in Mission Control, where it has been maneuvered just about to the pre-install position. We have put a pause in the operation to wait for daylight that will be occurring in about 15 minutes or so as the International Space Station passes into an orbital sunrise. The station is currently orbiting some 252 miles above the Earth, moving from southwest to northeast, just north of the Japanese islands, about to make a swing over the northern Pacific Ocean and then back down around for its next orbit of the Earth. The Cygnus spacecraft, in excellent shape, completed a textbook 3-day rendezvous that began with its launch from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station on Tuesday evening. Throughout the course of the 72 hours of approach to the International Space Station, all of Cygnus's systems operated in flawless fashion. You see there in this downlink video from the station's truss cameras that Cygnus on the upper right-hand corner of your screen has been maneuvered just about into position at the Earth-facing port of the Unity module of the International Space Station. A short time from now, it will be moved into what is called the pre-install position and then the ready-to-latch position. Ultimately, 4 gangs of 4 bolts apiece, 16 bolts in all, will be commanded to capture Cygnus. First in the first stage capture, the preliminary hard mate position, and then finally in the second stage capture position that will mark the hard mate, the actual mating of Cygnus to the International Space Station for about 5 weeks of operation at the station. Once that's complete, during the rest of this crew workday on this Saturday, the crew will begin to outfit the vestibule, the small passageway that exists between the station side of the Unity module docking or berthing interface and the Cygnus spacecraft itself. That will set the stage for the opening of the hatch of the Cygnus cargo craft about 4:30 Central Time on Sunday morning to enable the crew to get inside to begin the unloading of some 7,700 pounds of cargo, supplies, scientific experiments that will be utilized in the weeks ahead. On board the International Space Station, the crew, as it prepares for the actual mating of Cygnus to the International Space Station, had a busy overnight period as they presided over the monitoring of Cygnus as it made its final approach. Cygnus again executed a textbook rendezvous as it made its way in fine fashion up the R-bar, or the radial vector, just beneath the International Space Station. And in this video, you see Expedition 47 Commander Tim Kopra operating the station's robotic arm as he moved in for a grapple that occurred at 5:51 a.m. Central Time this morning, 6:51 a.m. Eastern Time, as the International Space Station and Cygnus passed over the southern Indian Ocean. It was right after that that Kopra made mention of the fact that he was honored to bring aboard the SS Rick Husband. That is the name that the Orbital ATK management placed on this Cygnus craft. They name each of the Cygnus resupply craft for a former astronaut or a late astronaut, in this case after Rick Husband, who was the commander of the ill-fated final flight of the Space Shuttle Columbia in February of 2003. Once Cygnus was grappled, and a hard handshake was made between the station's robotic arm and the cargo craft itself. The robotics officer here in Mission Control took over and began to maneuver Cygnus into what is called the pre-install position. Again, this video captured a short time ago shows the Cygnus with its signature ultraflex solar arrays being placed into the correct orientation toward the Earth-facing side of Unity and the common berthing mechanism to which the Cygnus spacecraft will be latched up to a short time from now. Everything has proceeded on track for the pre-install activities. Again, at the current time, the robotics officer is carefully monitoring the orientation and the alignment of the common berthing mechanism, the passive common berthing mechanism on the forward side of Cygnus with the active common berthing mechanism on the Earth-facing side of the Unity module to make sure we have a precise alignment before he guides it in for the so-called pre-install and ready-to-latch position that will mark the precursor to the actual bolting of Cygnus to the Earth-facing port of Unity. So we'll be standing by for all of that to take place in the minutes ahead. We should be moving into an orbital sunrise a few minutes from now, and then we will move in this handover between satellites and the tracking and data relay satellite system network of communications satellites that we employ for space station operations. And at that point, once we regain our communications link and move into orbital daylight, we will be in a position to have the robotics officer continuing the procedure to move Cygnus into its ready-to-latch position. The arrival of Cygnus at the International Space Station today is the first of 3 cargo ships that will arrive at the station on consecutive weekends. This coming Wednesday on March 30th, the Russian Progress 61 cargo craft will be undocked from the aft port of the Zvezda service module on the International Space Station and will back to a safe distance away from the station for several days of engineering tests by Russian flight controllers before it is deorbited on April the 8th. The vacancy of the aft port of the Zvezda service module will set the stage for Thursday's scheduled launch of the new unpiloted Russian ISS Progress 63 cargo craft from Site 31 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. That launch on Thursday is scheduled for 11:23 a.m. Central Time, which will be 10:23 p.m. at the Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. The Progress 63 will be launched into a deliberate 2-day rendezvous, unlike some recent 4-orbit 6-hour rendezvous of Russian spacecraft. This will be a deliberate 2-day rendezvous, the second flight of a Progress in the new MS configuration, where a lot of upgrades have been made to both Progress and Soyuz vehicles for manned operations that will move it from an analog to a digital telemetry, a new CORS rendezvous antenna for automated rendezvous operations, and other such upgrades. The 2 flights of the Progress 62 that is currently docked to the Pirs docking compartment, and Progress 63 coming up this week, will set the stage for the first human flight in an MS Soyuz vehicle, that being the Soyuz MSO-1 vehicle that will be launched on June 21st with Anatoly Ivanishin, NASA astronaut Kate Rubins, and Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi, who will fly a 2-day rendezvous profile in their own right, arriving at the station to join the Expedition 48 crew that will be in work at that time with Jeff Williams and his 2 crewmates, Alexei Ovchinin and Alex Gripochka, who arrived at the International Space Station a week ago today. With the Progress schedule for launch on Thursday, the new Progress 63 cargo craft, it will carry 3 tons of cargo to the International Space Station, arriving a week from today on April 2nd for a docking and automated docking to the aft port of the Zvezda service module. That docking to occur at 1 p.m. Central Time a week from today. Progress in turn will be followed the following week by the anticipated launch of the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft, the return to flight of SpaceX's Dragon cargo craft to the International Space Station following a launch failure back in June of last year. Dragon in its own right will be carrying some 3.5 tons of cargo to the International Space Station. That launch is scheduled on Friday, April 8th at 3:43 p.m. Central Time, 4:43 p.m. Eastern Time from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. It will fly a 2-day rendezvous profile in its own right, arriving at the International Space Station on Sunday, April the 10th. So with 3 consecutive cargo ships arriving at the station in successive weeks, some 12 tons of cargo expected to arrive at the International Space Station to more than supply the Expedition 47 crew and the crews to follow in rapid-fire succession. We're about 3.5 minutes away from flying into an orbital sunrise that will carry the International Space Station, which is currently orbiting over the North Pacific. It's about to make a northwest to southeasterly track that will carry the station towards the western coast of South America on this particular orbit of the Earth. And again, the robotics officer here in Mission Control is simply standing by in a pause position to continue the robotic installation of Cygnus to the Earth-facing port of the Unity module. It is interesting to note, as we reacquire our downlink television signal from the station, that once the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft arrives 2 weeks from tomorrow on Sunday, April 10th, it will place Dragon on the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module and thus will berth Dragon side by side to the Cygnus craft, the first time that both Cygnus and Dragon have occupied adjacent ports on the Earth-facing side of the U.S. segment of the International Space Station since U.S. commercial cargo vehicles began flying several years ago. As we await the resumption of robotic operations being conducted by the robotics officer in Mission Control, it's interesting to note that as the International Space Station and Cygnus pass into an orbital sunrise, preparations are continuing half a world away at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan for that launch of the unpiloted ISS Progress 63 cargo ship from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Again, that launch is scheduled for this coming Thursday, sending the Progress on a deliberate 2-day rendezvous to the International Space Station On Thursday, our launch coverage on NASA TV will begin at 11 a.m. Central Time, noon Eastern Time, for a launch that will take place 23 minutes later at 11:23 a.m. Central Time. Station now beginning to move into an orbital sunrise, and once we lock up voice communication with the crew, which should be momentarily, we should be seeing activity resume with the robotics officer nudging the Cygnus cargo craft ever so close to its ready-to-latch position on the Earth-facing side of the Unity module of the International Space Station. While we await the resumption of robotic operations inside the Destiny laboratory of the International Space Station, a good look at Expedition 47 Commander Tim Kopra, who manned the robotic arm as the prime robotic arm operator, along with the assistance of European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake, as they worked from the cupola of the station to reach out and grapple the Cygnus cargo craft. That grapple occurring again at 5:51 a.m. Central Time, 6:51 a.m. Eastern Time, some 2.5 hours ago.
This is station on space to ground 2 for Cygnus.
Go ahead on 2.
Hey Jay, good morning. We're somewhat familiar with the experiment that's in Cygnus called Sapphire, but we wanted to see if it'd be possible to send up some additional technical and safety information about the experiment.
Good morning to you, Tim, and yes, we can put that together and get it up to you.
Sounds great, thank you.
The Sapphire experiment referenced by Tim Kopra is an experiment that will be conducted after the Cygnus is released following its mission. It is currently scheduled to depart the station on May 20th. This is an experiment developed by the Glenn Research Center in concert with NASA and Orbital ATK that will deliberately light a fire that will test the flammability and destructive properties of a conflagration as the spacecraft enters the Earth's atmosphere and burns up of its own volition. But the Sapphire experiment has sensors and other temperature measurement devices on board that will better characterize the propagation of a fire in a spacecraft to develop fire mitigation techniques for spacecraft that will be built in the future. The robotics officer is very comfortable and has reported back to Flight Director Scott Stover that the alignment with the passive common berthing mechanism on the forward end of Cygnus is properly aligned with the centerline berthing camera system and the alignment perspective that the crew is seeing on board. You're taking a look at that common centerline berthing system that provides a visual acuity and situational awareness for the crew on board, as well as the robotics officer here in Mission Control as the cargo ship is moved into a ready-to-latch position, the precursor to the actual bolting of Cygnus with 4 gangs of 4 bolts apiece. First, we'll hear the call out for first stage capture, then second stage capture, and at that point, Cygnus will be hard mated to the Earth-facing port of the Unity module.
Station Houston on 2 for Jeff and CBM ops.
Go ahead, Jay.
Hey Jeff, the robo team's still working. We just wanted to give you a heads up. We're probably running about 5 to 10 minutes behind before we can give you that go at step 1 in your next procedure.
Okay, no problem. Just reviewing the procedure myself right now.
Copy that. We got you up on video in the lab, so wanted to give you a heads up that we need a little bit of time.
In the Destiny laboratory, veteran astronaut Jeff Williams, now in his 4th flight into space, his 3rd long-duration mission on the International Space Station. When Tim Kopra, Tim Peake, and Yuri Malenchenko depart the station in June, bringing to an end Expedition 47, Jeff Williams will become commander of the International Space Station to preside over Expedition 48. He and his crewmates, Alexei Ovchinin and Alex Gripochka, will be returning to Earth themselves in September. In late August, Williams will surpass the most days in space accrued by a U.S. astronaut, 520, currently held and recently set by Scott Kelly, who just returned several weeks ago from his 1-year mission aboard the International Space Station. By the time he returns to Earth, Jeff Williams will have compiled 534 days in space on his 4 missions. With the installation of the Cygnus cargo craft in its final stages, again, once the Progress 63 cargo craft arrives at the station 1 week from today, followed a week later by the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft that will occupy the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module right next door to Cygnus. 6 ports will be occupied at the station with 2 Soyuz vehicles, 2 Progress resupply vehicles, Cygnus and Dragon. That's not the first time that 6 vehicles have been at the station at the same time, but unique in the sense that it will be the first time that 2 U.S. commercial cargo vehicles will be in play at the International Space Station simultaneously. We are handing over between satellites, and our tracking and data relay satellite system will reacquire our downlink TV capability from the station momentarily. The International Space Station is currently flying 252 miles above the Earth, moving from northwest to southeast over the Pacific Ocean, just off the west coast of Mexico. And we're back on board the International Space Station again in the Destiny Laboratory. Jeff Williams, flight engineer who just arrived on the station with Alexei Ovchinin and Alex Skripochka a week ago, following a fast-track 4-orbit 6-hour ride from the launch pad at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan to a docking at the International Space Station. Williams and his crew now in the 8th day of their mission, while Kopra, Peak, and Malenchenko have begun the 103rd day of a 6-month tour on board. There's a good close-up view of the Cygnus ever so slowly being aligned and moved towards that open hatch, which is actually the common berthing mechanism. The common berthing mechanism will receive the passive side of the Cygnus cargo craft to permit the start of bolting. Again, there are 16 bolts, 4 gangs of 4 bolts apiece that will be latched up on commanding from the crew on board the station. They don't actually do the latching. It's conducted here on the ground by the mechanical systems officer in mission control, but the commands are sent and monitored by the crew on board. Jeff Williams in particular in the Destiny Laboratory at that workstation, monitoring what are known as CBM, or common berthing mechanism operations. Once Cygnus is hard mated to the Earth-facing port of Unity, the crew will spend a portion of the rest of the day conducting leak checks at the docking or berthing interface between Cygnus and the Unity module before they begin the outfitting of the vestibule, the small passageway between the station side of the berthing interface and Cygnus itself. The common berthing mechanism controllers, basically the controller boxes that are installed inside the station at the berthing interface, will be removed as well and stowed away. Their job no longer needed until the time that Cygnus is ready to depart. That's scheduled for May 20th. And coming on to see how the CBM operations are moving along, Alexei Ovchinin, the Russian cosmonaut who was the commander of the Soyuz TMA-20M spacecraft that brought him, Jeff Williams, and Alex Skripochka to the station 1 week ago. This view from a high-definition camera on the International Space Station showing two of the Russian vehicles at the complex and one of the Ultraflex solar arrays on the Cygnus cargo craft as it is now in the final stages of being placed in the correct orientation, the final few inches, if you will, before it moves into a so-called ready-to-latch configuration into the common berthing mechanism on the Earth-facing side of the Unity module. This is Mission Control Houston. Once again, we're standing by for further word from the robotics officer. We expect to pass some words on to Flight Engineer Jeff Williams a short time from now, as the Cygnus cargo craft is precisely aligned to the common berthing mechanism on the Earth-facing side of the Unity module of the complex. This is the view from the centerline berthing camera system.
On 2 for Jeff.
Go ahead, Houston.
Hey, Jeff, wanted to give you a status of where we're at. We have not achieved RTLs yet. The arm is pretty stretched out, and so the dynamics of getting those RTLs is a little bit tricky. The robo team's working hard at it, but we may need anywhere from 2 to 20 minutes more.
Okay, standing by. Thanks for the status.
And spacecraft communicator Jay Marshke apprising Jeff Williams of where we're at. Again, the robotic arm being stretched out as it was referenced refers to the fact that since Unity is the port of call for the Cygnus craft, the geometry of the extension of the robotic arm is a bit more challenging than it is for the Earth-facing port of the adjacent Harmony module, and as such there is a slightly slower procedure at hand in order to precisely align Cygnus with the common berthing mechanism to which it will be latched up to a short time from now. We're also about to pass out of range of our tracking and data relay satellite system, and we'll be reacquiring downlink video in about 6.5 minutes. So during that interim period, we do expect to be in a position to move Cygnus into what is called the ready-to-latch position, essentially guiding Cygnus's passive common berthing mechanism on its forward on the forward end of Cygnus into the envelope of the active common berthing mechanism on the Earth-facing port of Unity, to which it is to be attached and bolted into place just a few minutes from now. This is Mission Control Houston. If you're just joining us, to recap, we are in the final stages of the installation of the Orbital ATK Cygnus cargo craft to the Earth-facing port of the Unity module of the International Space Station. This coming after a textbook rendezvous and a capture or grapple of Cygnus using the Canadarm2 robotic arm under the control of Expedition 47 Commander Tim Kopra, who reached out and captured Cygnus at 5:51 a.m. Central Time, 6:51 a.m. Eastern Time, just about 3 hours ago. Once Cygnus was grappled, the robotics officer here in Mission Control took over and maneuvered Cygnus into its installation position. We're just about ready to move into a ready-to-latch position, basically guiding Cygnus's forward end into the envelope of the common berthing mechanism, the berthing port, if you will, on the Earth-facing side of Unity. At that point, the latching or bolting of Cygnus will begin as the mechanical systems officer here in Mission Control will preside over the bolting of 4 gangs of 4 bolts apiece, 16 bolts in all, to form a hard mate between Cygnus and the International Space Station. Once that's complete, there will be leak checks at the berthing interface between Cygnus and the Unity module, to be followed by the start of the outfitting of the passageway between the station and Cygnus that will lead to the opening of the hatch to the cargo craft on Sunday morning and the beginning of the unloading of some 3.5 tons of cargo, supplies, experiments that were brought up on the SS Rick Husband. This is Mission Control Houston. The robotic arm continues to press in ever so slowly to what ultimately will be the ready-to-latch position for Cygnus on the Earth-facing port of the Unity module of the International Space Station. We should be there in just a few minutes. We're now receiving word from the robotics officer that we're in the ready-to-latch stage, beginning the process of positioning Cygnus ever so close to the point where the bolting can commence. So we'll stand by for further word, expecting to pass words up to Flight Engineer Jeff Williams momentarily. All quiet here in the flight control room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. We're just ever so close to completing the ready-to-latch configuration that will initiate the process of bolting that will be overseen by the mechanical systems officer here in Mission Control. And as we wait, so does Flight Engineer Jeff Williams in the Destiny Laboratory of the International Space Station as he will monitor the common berthing mechanism latching operations that will take place. Again, 4 gangs of 4 bolts apiece, 16 bolts in all, will be commanded to hard mate the Cygnus cargo craft to the Earth-facing port of the Unity module of the station.
Station Houston on 2 for Jeff and Tim Copra and Timeline.
Go ahead.
Hey Jeff, no good news yet on the RTLs. Right now we don't have KU, so we wanted to talk about the timeline a little bit with you. We think we're about an hour behind. We'd like to send you off to do your rodent research gather activity while we wait to get video back and then while the robo team presses in for RTLs.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
And the reason that I mentioned Tim was on his timeline, just a heads up to him that we're an hour behind, so the leak check will be delayed if we can. If he's looking to gain some efficiency on the timeline, he's got to go for the PCS relocates, as well as steps 1 through 3 only in the leak check procedure.
Hey, copy that. I can move the PCS in steps 1 through 3 in the leak check.
That's a good copy, Tim. Thanks.
This is Mission Control Houston. To update all of you following us on NASA television and on the web, spacecraft communicator Jay Marshke just provided an update as to where we're at with the final latching activities to hard mate the Cygnus cargo craft to the Earth-facing port of the Unity module of the International Space Station. We are ever so slightly out of alignment as far as the ready-to-latch indications are concerned, according to the robotics officer here in Mission Control. And since we've gone into a 30-minute loss of signal for our downlink television capability from the station, we have to wait until we regain that, which will be at the bottom of the hour at 9:30 Central Time, 10:30 Eastern Time. As a result, Marshke told Williams that this whole procedure is about an hour behind the timeline. So they've instructed both Williams and Expedition Commander Tim Copra to go off and do other work to try to gain efficiencies for the remainder of the day. And as a result, what we will do for our coverage here is we'll take a pause, return the NASA TV satellite back to NASA headquarters in Washington, and we'll be back with you at 9:25 a.m. Central Time, 10:25 a.m. Eastern Time to pick up the final few steps that will lead to first and second stage capture and the bolting of Cygnus into place on the Earth-facing port of the Unity module. Again, we'll come back in about 20 minutes to resume our coverage of Cygnus installation operations at the International Space Station. We'll be back at 9:25 a.m. Central, 10:25 a.m. Eastern. In the meantime, this is Mission Control Houston. Good day once again from the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. On console at this hour, the Orbit 2 team of flight controllers as they await the completion of the installation of the Orbital ATK Cygnus cargo craft to the Earth-facing port of the Unity module of the International Space Station. We're about an hour behind the timeline, this due to no particular reason other than the deliberate nature of the operation to precisely align Cygnus to the berthing port on the Earth-facing side of Unity. The reach of the robotic arm to get to that Unity berthing port a bit more challenging for the robotics officer in Mission Control than it is to attach a cargo craft to the Harmony module at the adjacent port on the Earth-facing side of the U.S. segment of the International Space Station. So we opted, Flight Director Scott Stover opted to wait until we regained a downlink television capability, which is coming up about 4 minutes from now, a nice healthy chunk of KU band communications downlink capability through our tracking and data relay satellite system before we press into what is called the ready-to-latch position, basically inserting the Cygnus's forward end into the envelope of the common berthing mechanism on the Earth-facing port of Unity. Once those RTL indications or ready-to-latch indications from the sensors on the common berthing mechanism are noted down here in Mission Control, then the bolting of Cygnus in place through the commands to initiate the bolting of 4 gangs of 4 bolts apiece, 16 bolts in all, that will form a hard mate between Cygnus and the Unity module. About 3 hours and 45 minutes ago, Expedition 47 Commander Tim Kopra, working out of the cupola, extended the station's robotic arm to grapple the Cygnus cargo craft at 5:51 a.m. Central Time, 6:51 a.m. Eastern Time, completing a textbook three-day rendezvous for Cygnus that began with its launch from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida Tuesday night atop a United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket. Once the capture was completed, then the robotics officer here in Mission Control began the process, a very slow glacial process, if you will, of maneuvering Cygnus into its installation position. Here is essentially the highlights, the video of Cygnus being maneuvered towards the Unity module in a sequential fashion, a very deliberate process to send commands to place the Cygnus in the correct geometry to precisely align it with the Earth-facing port of the Unity module of the International Space Station. All of that activity went very well. No issues except the deliberate nature of the process itself that has put the crew down on the timeline by about an hour as we speak to you at this moment. So once we regain our television capability very shortly, about a minute and a half or so from now, we should be in a position to pick up the procedures that will result in the ready-to-latch indications and then the bolting of Cygnus to complete today's activities. Once Cygnus is bolted into place, then the crew will conduct leak checks at the interface between the station and the Cygnus itself at the Unity berthing port, and then Tim Kopra, the station commander, will begin a two-part process to install various hardware along the vestibule, the small passageway that connects the International Space Station's Unity module with Cygnus itself. The opening of the hatch to the Cygnus will not occur today. That was always planned to take place on Sunday morning in the wee hours. That will enable the crew to get inside the SS Rick Husband, as the Cygnus is dubbed and named after, to begin unloading some 7,700 pounds of cargo and experiments. The International Space Station is currently flying 252 statute miles over China, moving from southwest to northeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. All of the station's systems in excellent shape for its 6 occupants, and Cygnus' systems have functioned flawlessly since it was launched some 3.5 days ago from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. So we're standing by for the resumption of a downlink television signal, which we should be receiving momentarily, and we'll be picking up in the procedures to get Cygnus into its ready-to-latch position at the Earth-facing port of Unity, and finally to get it bolted into place. As you can see, the flight control room here in Houston more heavily populated than is normally the case for a Saturday due to the dynamic operations to complete the rendezvous with Cygnus and its capture, and moments from now its installation and bolting into place. This flight control team actually will be working 3 weekends in a row, with next Saturday representing the arrival of the Russian unpiloted Progress 63 cargo craft, which will be launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on Thursday for a deliberate 2-day rendezvous. It will arrive at the station for an automated docking to the aft port of the Zvezda service module 1 week from today. That will be followed up in 2 weeks by the arrival of the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft that is scheduled to launch on April 8th from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida, a 2-day rendezvous for its grapple and installation onto the adjacent port to which Cygnus is about to be installed. Dragon will be installed on the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module, marking the first time that both U.S. commercial cargo vehicles will reside at the station simultaneously. While we await further word from the robotics officer here in Mission Control inside the Destiny Laboratory, a good view of European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake, who assisted Tim Kopra several hours ago in the monitoring of Cygnus's approach and the grapple of the cargo craft. Once the grapple was completed using the Canadarm2 robotic arm, Kopra and Peake turned over all of the robotic operations to the ground controllers, the Robo, as he is called by his call sign here in Mission Control. This is Mission Control Houston. Good news. The robotics officer now reports precise alignment and 4 ready-to-latch indications as per the plan. A bit later than had been expected, but we are now in configuration for the beginning of the commanding to start bolting Cygnus to the Earth-facing port of the Unity module.
Station Houston on 2 for Cygnus.
Head on 2.
Good news, we have 4 RTLs. So for procedure 1.502, maneuver to RTL is complete. Crews go for first stage capture. And we also need to let you know that the no exercise constraint will be extended.
Okay, that's all copied. Thanks very much.
Spacecraft communicator Jay Marshke here in Mission Control, radioing up that we are ready for the commanding of the bolting of Cygnus to the Earth-facing port of the Unity module. We're now almost 4 hours past the point of its capture. And again, getting Cygnus precisely aligned by the robotics officer here in Mission Control took a bit longer than had been expected due to the geometry of the reach of the robotic arm to the Unity module itself. But we're in a good configuration now, ready to start the bolting procedures. Once we hear second stage capture, that is the official demarcation point of the hard mate of Cygnus to the International Space Station. Jeff Williams inside the Destiny laboratory of the International Space Station with Peak right by his side. Williams will be presiding over the so-called CBM operations, the Common Berthing Mechanism operations, as the commanding is sent to initiate the bolting that will be overseen by the Mechanical Systems Officer here in Mission Control.
Station Houston on 2. Jeff and Tim, just a heads up when you get into that Node 1 Nader CBM procedure. Step 3, we do have stable attitude control and thrusters are disabled.
Okay, copy. I'm just finishing up step 2 right now, so after that I'll move on to step 4.
Copy. Thanks for the status.
And capture first stage is going in now.
Copy.
This is Mission Control Houston. The mechanical systems officer here in Mission Control reports a good first stage capture. So we're halfway there to the official mating demarcation point that will make Cygnus an official part of the International Space Station until May 20th.
And Houston Station per step 4, I see 4 opens on the capture switches, so go for SSRMS mode to limp.
Houston copies. Thank you. Station Houston on 2. SSRMS mode to limp is complete. Go for second stage capture.
Copy and work.
And we're standing by for the final point of the mating of Cygnus to the International Space Station. Standing by for second stage capture call.
Copy.
And I see all latches at 11 degrees. I'm going to step 6.
Houston copies and concurs.
Wire bolts going in now.
Houston copies.
two veteran space travelers, Tim Coper, the expedition commander, on your left, flight engineer Jeff Williams on your right. Williams watching the data on his monitors as we await confirmation of second stage capture, the final mating of Cygnus to the Earth-facing port of the Unity module.
Houston, per step 7, auto-safing is inhibited. Go for SSRMS brakes on. You can ungrapple the element for time length.
Copy that. Good news. Thanks, Jeff. The exercise constraint can now be lifted, and we'll put the safing in work for your next procedure regarding CBCS.
Copy all.
This is Mission Control Houston, and the good news relayed up to Jeff Williams. 9:52 a.m. Central Time, second stage capture confirmed as the International Space Station passed 252 miles over the Pacific Ocean. And with that, the Cygnus cargo craft is mated to the International Outpost and will remain at the Earth-facing port of the Unity module now until May 20th. It's hatched to be opened on Sunday morning as the crew will begin the process of unloading some 7,700 pounds of cargo and experiments for future use on the international complex. Once again, the official mating time for Cygnus to the Earth-facing port of Unity, 9:52 a.m. Central Time, 10:52 a.m. Eastern Time, some 4 hours after Cygnus was grappled by Tim Copra and Tim Peake using the Canadarm2 robotic arm as the station flew over the southern Indian Ocean. So that'll wrap it up for today. Cygnus now hard-mated to the International Space Station. The crew will continue to work through the rest of the day to conduct leak checks at the berthing interface between Cygnus and the Unity module before the start of the outfitting of the small passageway that represents the access point between the station side of the berthing interface and the Cygnus cargo craft itself. Once again, Cygnus officially mated to the International Space Station at 9:52 a.m. Central Time, 10:52 a.m. Eastern Time. With that, we'll wrap up our coverage for today's arrival of the Orbital ATK Cygnus cargo craft at the International Space Station. One programming note. We'll recap all of the weekend's activities and all of the activities of the brand new week for the Expedition 47 crew on board the International Space Station on Monday as we broadcast our Space Station live broadcast at 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time on NASA television. With that, we'll wrap up our coverage, and we hope you have a great weekend. Cygnus now officially mated to the International Space Station. This is Mission Control, Houston.